Everyone knows the name Henry Ford, the man who put America on wheels, the inventor of the assembly line, the genius who made cars affordable for the middle class, the visionary who paid his workers $5 a day when the industry standard was $2. His name is on millions of vehicles, on buildings, on hospitals and universities. He's remembered as an American hero, a self-made billionaire, a pioneer of modern industry. But there's another Henry Ford, the one they don't teach in business school, the man who ran a corporate surveillance state, who hired thugs to beat workers who tried to unionize, who published some of the most vicious anti-Semitic propaganda in American history, who received a medal from Nazi Germany and kept a portrait of Adolf Hitler in his office. This is the story of Henry Ford, the fame, the fortune, and the darkness underneath. The genius. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile. He didn't even invent the assembly line. What he did was perfect it, turn it into a system so efficient that it changed manufacturing forever. Before Ford, cars were handmade, expensive, luxury items for the wealthy. A car cost as much as a house. Ford had a different vision, a car for the common man, and the only way to do that was to make manufacturing faster and cheaper than anyone thought possible. In 1913, Ford introduced the moving assembly line at his Highland Park plant. Workers stood in one place, the car came to them. Each worker performed one specific task. The result was staggering. The time to build a Model T dropped from 12 hours to 93 minutes. Production exploded, costs plummeted. The Model T sold for $850 in 1908. By 1925, the price had dropped to $260. Ford had made the automobile accessible to millions, and he understood something profound. If you pay your workers well, they become your customers. In 1914, Ford announced that he would pay his workers $5 a day, double the industry standard. Workers flooded to Detroit. The company had its pick of the best labor. This is the Henry Ford everyone knows, the innovator, the businessman who understood that prosperity comes from paying workers enough to buy what they produce. But that's only half the story. The control. The $5 day wasn't generosity, it was control. To qualify for the $5 wage, workers had to pass inspection by Ford's sociological department, investigators who visited workers' homes unannounced, who checked if they were living morally. If you drank alcohol, you didn't get $5. If you gambled, divorced, or your wife worked outside the home, you didn't get $5. Ford's investigators tracked how workers spent their money, what they ate, how they raised children, whether they attended church, whether their homes were clean enough. Immigrant workers were required to attend the Ford English School, not just to learn the language, to be Americanized, to abandon their culture. The graduation ceremony was telling. Workers dressed in their home country's clothes and walked into a giant melting pot on stage. They emerged wearing identical suits, waving American flags. Your identity didn't matter. Your culture didn't matter. You were Ford workers now. This wasn't benevolence. This was social engineering on a corporate scale, and if workers didn't comply, they were fired. The surveillance state. By the 1930s, Ford's control had evolved into something darker. Harry Bennett was Ford's right-hand man, a former boxer who ran the Ford service department. On paper, security. In reality, a private army. Bennett hired ex-criminals, boxers, street fighters. At its peak, the service department employed over 3,000 men. They monitored workers on the floor. They followed them home. They beat anyone who talked about unions. Service department thugs walked the lines. If you talked too much, you were pulled aside. If you complained, you disappeared, fired, blacklisted, sometimes beaten. Workers called the Ford plants concentration camps. In 1932, during the Great Depression, unemployed workers organized a hunger march to Ford's River Rouge plant. They wanted jobs. They wanted relief. Ford's private security, backed by Dearborn police, opened fire on the unarmed marchers. 4 workers were killed. Dozens wounded. The Ford massacre. Ford never apologized. Bennett called the marchers communists, and the factory kept running. The anti-Semitism. In 1919, Henry Ford bought a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. For the next 7 years, he used it to publish some of the most vicious anti-Semitic propaganda in American history. Articles blaming Jews for World War I, for communism, for labor strikes, for the degradation of American culture. The paper serialized a fraudulent text called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a conspiracy theory claiming Jews were plotting to control the world. It had been debunked as a hoax decades earlier. Ford republished it anyway. He compiled these articles into a book called The International Jew. It was translated into multiple languages, it was distributed across Europe, and it became a foundational text for the Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler kept a portrait of Henry Ford in his office. He praised Ford in Mein Kampf. In 1938, Ford received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest honor Nazi Germany could give to a foreigner. Ford accepted it. When confronted about his anti-Semitism, Ford claimed he was misunderstood, that he was fighting international finance, not Jewish people specifically, that he was defending American values. But the articles were explicit, the book was explicit, and the damage was real. Jewish groups boycotted Ford. Pressure mounted. In 1927, Ford issued a public apology and shut down the Dearborn Independent. But the apology was vague. He never retracted the content. He never took responsibility for the influence his words had, and privately, according to those who worked with him, his views never changed. The Union War. By the late 1930s, every major American automaker had recognized unions. General Motors, Chrysler. All of them had negotiated with the United Auto Workers Union, except Ford. Ford refused. Absolutely. He saw unions as communist infiltration, as a threat to his control, as a personal betrayal, and he had Harry Bennett and the Service Department to enforce that refusal. In May 1937, union organizers attempted to hand out leaflets at the River Rouge plant. They stood on a public overpass leading to the factory. They weren't blocking traffic. They weren't trespassing. They were exercising their legal right to organize. Bennett's men attacked them. In what became known as the Battle of the Overpass, Service Department thugs beat union organizers in broad daylight. Newspaper photographers captured the violence. Images of men being kicked, punched, and thrown downstairs ran in papers across the country. The public was outraged. The National Labor Relations Board ruled Ford had violated federal labor law, but Ford still refused to recognize the union. It took 4 more years. Strikes, legal battles, public pressure. Finally, in 1941, Ford signed a contract with the UAW, but he did it bitterly. He called it the worst day of his life. So why does everyone know the first Henry Ford and not the second? Because we want heroes. We want stories about self-made billionaires. We want to believe that success comes from innovation, and Henry Ford fits that story. Poor farm boy becomes richest man in America. The American dream personified. But the American dream has always had a shadow. For every success story, there are thousands of workers whose names we don't know, who built the cars, who stood on the assembly line for 12-hour shifts, who were monitored, controlled, beaten, and discarded. Henry Ford didn't build Ford Motor Company alone. He built it on the backs of workers who had no choice but to accept his terms. The legacy isn't just the Model T, it's the model of corporate power. That success justifies control. That innovation excuses cruelty. Both versions of Henry Ford are real. Both are documented. Both are part of American history. The question is, which one we choose to remember and why.